What's going on, guys? Welcome back to episode 48. Today we have Rachel Balkovec all the way from Amsterdam. This was an Over the Seas podcast. We had a little bit of trouble in the beginning trying to set things up a little bit. We had a little static, so if you guys hear any static in the beginning, just kind of hang tight as that kind of comes to a halt as we move through the podcast. But we got the bull on it as well with us today, so that was an interesting part of it. Rachel had mentioned a little bit about how she wants to move as like a 6-year-old, and so we're currently testing the bull to see if we can get him to be agile enough and coordinated enough to move as a young child would in terms of having movement and coordination and all those sort of things. But it was an interesting topic as we rode through a lot of Rachel's stories. She is a awesome human being. So she's overseas right now actually studying biomechanical, neuroscience, those sort of things. As she over in the States, she was actually a strength and conditioning coach at LSU. She was with the Tigers for a few years there before she went to the St. Louis Cardinals. She spent some time in Exos down in Arizona. She was with the Houston Astros and has really been all over the place. She tells an unbelievable story about culture, and I won't give too much of it away besides just that she shares a lot of her story with everything I just mentioned and what she's done or does. It's a unique piece in the podcast that was none of those titles or none of those career paths that actually implemented a lot of her value system and behaviors and things that she's seen that have allowed her to be so successful. So it's an awesome story. She has some tons of nuggets and tons of advice on just being gritty and holding strong and tackling on your ambitions and having a strong vision. So she does have an unbelievable vision moving towards the future. So it's cool that she does touch on that in the podcast. So enjoy episode 48, and hope everyone's doing well. Cheers. There we are. We just pressed play. We had some technical difficulties, Rachel, so we're going to try this again. And hopefully the buzzing doesn't flow into it, as Steve was just making fun of the otter, Nolan Johnson, and myself. We're getting into 50 episodes here, and we're still trying to figure out how to run our technical our podcast gear, Steve.
I'm thinking about walking.
Thinking about taking off on the boys.
I can't work like this anymore.
You know what I think about this, though, is that for anyone listening, we had a few technical difficulties. So if there's a minor buzz on this podcast, I'm going to need you to get over it, because we are recording this podcast from like 2,500 miles away, and it's a damn miracle that we're even doing this. So
it's a miracle. I mean, at my house right now, there's been a fire alarm that's been going off for 3 years that only people who enter my home realize. So people get over it in the first couple minutes.
That is so true. I haven't even thought about that until you just said that.
Yeah.
That is extremely true. He does have a fire alarm that goes off. We'll be having family dinners, and this thing's just beeping, and everyone's just decided to allow it into our environment.
It's just part of who we are.
So feed off that, because that just blew my mind to even think about it 1 minute in. This is actually sound traveling over the ocean here. Where are you at currently, Rachel, just so everyone has a really good idea of what you're just saying about where we are in the world?
I am in Holland. I'm in Amsterdam in the Netherlands. So
in
Northern Europe.
Yeah, and you're at school there currently.
Yes, I am. I'm doing a master's in biomechanics and research.
Come again?
So, yeah. All that means is it's a lot of math with a sprinkle of biomechanics. So I'm learning how to use math software and do, second derivatives and all that fun stuff that I learned probably in high school, and then I forgot everything, and now I'm paying a lot of money to go back and learn it again. That's the summary.
Scariest environment imaginable. That's all you had to say. Scariest environment imaginable.
There's a real good shot Steve could go down during this podcast and just in a mind buzz of a blackout. So if anyone hears an absolute loud drop, that's just Steve's forehead pounding the table. Well, so I gotta touch on the story of how this all connected, because we have I guess we have kind of mutually connected through Brian McKenzie, who was on the podcast I think 20 episodes or so ago, and he and I stayed in touch, and then he sent me an email one day and said, "Hey, you got to reach out to this Rachel chick. She was in Major League Baseball, which you can touch on a little bit. You were a strength coach with the Houston Astros and St. Louis Cardinals, correct?" Yep. So you were with them, and then the last time we talked, you had jumped over to Amsterdam and got into the biomechanical stuff, which I'm really curious because I didn't ask you last conversation of what has driven you through all these little endeavors. I shouldn't say little endeavors.
Pretty big deal.
Yeah, pretty big deal here. But yeah, so we connected. We obviously had an awesome conversation just about it turned into human life as always, just what makes humans. But what is can you take us through, you originally grew up in Nebraska, so Midwest gal like all of us. So we get some Midwest folks here on the podcast. And so what started your softball player that gets you into the baseball world in sense of strength training, but what was the early drive? Take us through the early passion projects here of what got you into thinking and doing the things that you're currently doing.
Oh man, it's where do I start? I'm a habitual nomad, so I've lived in I think 13, I don't really know, I've stopped counting, but 13 or 14 cities in the past 10 years, and most of that has been for jobs, some school, but it started, I would say, I was born in Nebraska, had an awesome family. I played softball at Creighton University, which is in Omaha, Nebraska, and then I transferred to University of New Mexico, and the long story short of why I got into strength and conditioning is that I really sucked at softball, in college anyway. I had the yips, which is a topic that I'm sure you're familiar with.
Yes.
And I still have not seen a worse case of the yips than myself. So
I don't know.
I'm good at. Oh, you think you know someone else?
Yeah, I think I know someone else who had the yips.
Staring at him right now.
I mean, he might be a couple feet from me.
Oh, really? Okay.
No way. How did we not connect on the yips?
I don't know, but I could talk for a long time about that.
That's what drove me out of baseball. Yeah, we're
going to come back to it.
Yeah, sorry. We don't mean to interrupt it. Keep on going.
Yeah, so that pretty much ended my career. But in the meantime, as I was transitioning from the identity of, okay, I'm a catcher, I'm a softball player, I kind of found my own little way into contributing to the team still from the weight room. And so I really took to that aspect of it. And it was able to, like I said, just find a position of leadership and something that I was good at, or at least that I could work hard and see results at, and I did, and I think was still able to serve in a little bit of a leadership role on the team, even though I basically wasn't playing, especially towards the end of my career. So anyway, so that's kind of the strength and conditioning aspect, and then getting into baseball was not actually because of softball necessarily, but I was at LSU doing a graduate assistantship, so I just skipped over a couple of things. But if I told the whole story, it'd be this would take the whole podcast to tell every move that I've made. But skipped over a couple of things. I'm at LSU doing a graduate assistantship in strength and conditioning, and simultaneously, I was actually dating a baseball player of all things who was at the time a minor leaguer for the Dodgers. But we had met in my undergraduate degree and dated for almost 4 years at that point. And so at the same time of me, really early in my career of strength and conditioning, and I was at LSU working with the baseball and softball team, which are amazing, and were both in the College World Series when I was there, just really electric, high intensity cultures.
What years was that?
I was there from 2010 to 2012.
Were you with, we just had Anthony Renato on the podcast last week.
I saw that, and I wasn't. We never crossed paths.
Were you there? Were you there with DJ LeMahieu?
Yes. Wait,
okay.
Maybe.
Yeah, he would have been. I think his last year was 2009.
Yeah, I probably crossed paths with those guys as they came back to train, but not. Yeah, they're a little bit older than me. So, anyway, so I was doing that, and I was kind of starting my career. And simultaneously, my boyfriend at the time was going through the minor leagues and was seeing the glory of strength and conditioning and professional baseball and the nutrition and eating hot dogs for dinner and all that stuff. And I was like, God, I really want to get into baseball strength and conditioning and help improve it, and kind of be a force and just bring some of the stuff I've learned, to that realm. And once the St. Louis Cardinals called LSU and asked for an intern, and my boss at the time recommended me, and so I got an internship with the St. Louis Cardinals. That led to a 3-year career with the Cardinals. I skipped over for some stuff, but I was their minor league coordinator for 2 years, and then for the past 3 years, I've been with the Astros as their Latin American coordinator for 2 years, and then I was in AA this past season in Corpus Christi for them, and then I moved to Amsterdam, and now I'm here in school.
So there's to go into a single part of it, I've always heard that the Cardinals are one of the best run organizations in professional sports. Can you talk about being there?
Yes, I can. I don't know in what aspect, because, Major League Baseball organizations are huge, and they might be well run in one way and not in the other. It just depends. But I would say that some things I appreciated about the Cardinals was just I don't always appreciate tradition, but I do appreciate kind of the way that they dealt with the players in some ways, where it's the shave your face, wear the right thing, everyone's uniform type of aspect. They're definitely a traditional organization in that way, and I did appreciate that about them. I would say I took more towards what I've learned from the Astros, since I just mentioned that I'm kind of anti-tradition.
Sure.
Yeah.
The Astros are anti-tradition, and
you vibe with that more.
I vibed definitely more with the Astros, and I definitely have a lot of respect for many people in that organization. Just especially their general manager Jeff Luhnow is definitely an inspiration to me, and I would say part of the reason why I'm in Amsterdam doing this is because I want to cross over to the front office to eventually be a general manager, and I would say that a large part of that is just being inspired by seeing Jeff Luhnow work and how he's developed the organization from every standpoint, and create an organizational culture that's based in fuck what we did yesterday. That's old news, just constant rapid growth. And I really appreciated the past 3 years with that organization. So
it's crazy to think a lot of questions out of that quick storyline. I'm going to stay on this one because this is, so you go to, just for people to understand this, you're at LSU, which is obviously one of the most electric cultures in college sports. And
Go
then,
Tigers.
and then you go to St. Louis Cardinals, like you said, a traditional, one of the best organizations in Major League sports in that regard. And then you go to Houston Astros, who have obviously had tremendous success in recent years. And what would you say as a non-biased, just an opinion of your experience, so not talking about any specific organization of those three, if you were just speaking on a let's say a podcast, and you were just talking about, you were just going to say in your experience of time, what are the pros and cons of a successful, what are the pros and cons of culture? What makes a culture really electrifying, or what have you accumulated from all of that to pass that on as what's the best culture you've seen?
Oh, that is such a good question, and a deep one, and something that is I think I would call myself a mediocre strength coach, but I'm an excellent student of culture, and doesn't mean that I'm excellent at making culture. It just means I study it. I love and fascinated by organizational culture and what makes people win, because it's not always the best talent.
Right.
And so I would say LSU is probably one of the best cultures that I've ever been in, and I will also take a hard left. You're not going to see this one coming. And I'll tell you that one of the other best cultures I've ever worked in is a restaurant.
Nice.
So
hard left for sure.
Yeah. I'll touch on LSU quickly. Just the thing I took away from LSU, which kind of, I'll be honest, just screwed me for my whole career, because it was really my first real experience where I had my own teams, was programming for them, and I was in it, for 2 years.
Yeah.
And man, I'm just completely screwed over, because I saw just this elite level of everyone was on the same page. I'm talking about from the janitors to the AD was just elite level standards. Everyone was pretty intense. So many of the coaches and then the athletes take on that mentality of just extremely high expectations. And it was awesome. I thrived in that environment. It was fun. It was extremely hard, but extremely fun. And it all came down to the people.
Mm-hmm.
which I think is not that hard to conceptualize, but people get that wrong a lot. You see a lot of, well, just from a sports standpoint, well, this guy, has this stats or whatever, like he can help us on the field, and then he's a complete asshole in the clubhouse. Like, that affects your culture. And I think some people overlook that, while at LSU, that was like everything. Your attitude was everything. If you weren't holding your own as far as like the type of person you weren't going to last there. And that's from an athlete standpoint, but also from a staff standpoint. And I was told that from day one, and I didn't realize until later. I couldn't believe the interview process for LSU was so short. I had like basically a 10-minute conversation with my boss there, Melissa Moore. And she was like, yeah, I think you're going to be a really good fit for the graduate assistant position here. And I remember thinking, what? Like, don't I have to interview with somebody else? Don't I have to, like, what? Why is this so easy? And now I look back and I realize, like, they just knew the certain type of human being that they wanted in their staff, in their department, and then around the athletes. And it was pretty simple for them. It was about the people. Now, I will tell you about a restaurant experience that I had.
Yeah.
So this goes, I skipped over this part, so this is good that we're going back to it. So after I did an internship for the Cardinals, I decided I was going to go back to school at Arizona State to get a PhD in nutrition. I quickly realized I missed coaching, and I didn't want to do that, especially that early in my career. So anyway, I moved to Phoenix, and I thought, hey, I'm moving to Phoenix. It was still pretty early in the off season. I had just done an internship for the Cardinals. I was at LSU. I had been at Athletes Performance, which is now Exos. I was a college athlete. Like, I had this great little resume for a young strength coach. And I thought, hey, let me get online and I'll apply for all of the internships with AZL baseball, which for listeners who don't know about baseball, that's like a low level of the minor leagues. And there was plenty of internships. There were like 8 or 9 internships listed in Phoenix for low level positions. Well, long story short, I didn't get any of those. I had some pretty direct discrimination. It was a pretty big wake up call for me that even though I had, got my foot in the door with an internship with the St. Louis Cardinals, that it still wasn't going to be an easy haul being a woman. So I'll spare the details of all of that. But so what I had to do after having that resume is go and be a waitress. So
no way.
Which I was horrified by at the time, but I look back and it's amazing. Of course, the cliche, everything happens for a reason. I actually will use some of these hiring tactics that I learned at this restaurant. It's Hillstone, and that's like an upscale version of Houston's, if anyone's familiar with that. So this restaurant, I'm telling you, I didn't even know. I just walked in, put in my resume. I obviously did not want to be waitressing. I was not happy about that. So I put in my resume, and immediately I was like, what is wrong with this? It's crazy. I had to go through 4 in-person interviews, and then I had to take a test, and then I had a 7-day orientation, which they almost kicked me out of because I didn't pass one of the tests for their the test that you have to take to know the menu. Yeah. And I just was like, what? At first I was about to quit because I was like, this is stupid. This is a waitressing job. And then once I got into their culture, because culture is not, of course we think of culture and these big, football and this and that. No, culture can be in any business, and the ones who nail it are going to be successful. And this restaurant business is so successful that they do not spend a penny on advertising or marketing at all, ever. It's all word of mouth, and they have an extremely successful business all across the country. So, and it all comes down to people. So I got into this, I was waitressing, and I immediately got in there and figured out, they basically have this extremely strict vetting process, and a lot of the waitresses and waiters that work there were either getting their degree, they had their degree and they were in between jobs or whatever. And it was just this fast-paced electric environment. I mean, people would yell at you if you weren't doing stuff right, and it was insanity. And I urge you, if you have a chance, to go to Houston's or Hillstone restaurant and take notice of the service and the waitresses and waiters, and you'll know what I'm talking about. But again, extremely high expectations. I became friends with a lot of those people because they were just extremely driven people. I mean, waiters and waitresses, but we were all kind of, I guess, coming up in our careers.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't like any of us were going to be there for forever, but we were just extremely driven people. And they gave us, before we were hired, 2 personality tests that I still prefer to use in my own hiring process.
So
yeah,
go ahead, Steve.
Yeah,
go ahead.
No, this is really fun for me.
Yeah.
Harvey kept pointing at me because my life is revolved around building culture. So within our club, our baseball club, there's a baseball club, there's the MindStrong project, there's MASH Performance, there's MindStrong Academy, there's facility rentals. So it's been a culture that's been cultivating over the last 8 years. But the word that you said that sticks out to me and I want you to talk more about is just expectations. I've just found that everyone wants to talk about culture, but then they don't set any sort of expectation to allow the culture to grow. And for you to have to go through a ridiculous hiring process shows why they are where they are and setting expectations. But that seems to be something that's really hard for people. Why do you think that is?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I have a funny story to tell you, actually, based off of that. At that restaurant, I'll never forget my first day ever of waiting tables there. One of the principles at Hillstone and Houston is that no trash or no debris will ever stay on the table for like more than a minute. So if you empty a sugar packet into your iced tea and you put it on the side of the table, a waiter or waitress will come by and pick that up without even saying anything. They'll come by and just like whisk it away from your table. And so I had my first day, I'm like running around with my head cut off, and I walked past the table and there was a sugar packet sitting on the edge of the table, and another waitress grabbed my arm and pulled me to the side, and she goes, "Did you see that sugar packet?" And I said, I was like, what? I was like, "Oh, I'm sorry." And she was like, "We're better than that. Go back and pick it up." And I was like, "Oh my God."
Welcome to the show.
So that brings me to your question. Is why are people afraid of it? What does it mean? And you're right. Like, everyone talks about culture, and I'm sorry, but everyone has the quote on the wall, and it's like, everyone has those fucking quotes. Mm-hmm. How many people actually hold each other to it? And the other thing from that incident is it wasn't a manager that pulled me aside. It was another waitress.
And that's the key.
And by the way, that girl is getting her PhD in, I forget what it was. PhD in like
something above waitressing. No offense to waitresses.
Right. Like something that was like it's not about waitressing. She just had high standards. She knew the standards that were put in place by the organization, and it meant a lot to her, not because it was a sugar packet, but because it was a standard and she was going to hold it. Wow. And I wasn't holding it, and she was going to hold me to it. And so then if you put that into a team setting, the best teams, and I saw this, a coach had an interview on Twitter the other day that said it so nicely, but basically on average teams, coaches have to hold the players accountable. On good teams, players hold the players accountable. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Like, so the manager didn't pull me aside, she pulled me aside. And on real, like, excellent teams, you see the expectations are set by the management usually. Maybe you have like team councils, or you have other expectations that are set by players. But the organization or the coaches or the leadership sets the expectation. But in great cultures, the teammates, the non-management are holding each other accountable. And that's when you see excellent cultures, I think. So if you're on a team and the coach has to be the one that's constantly, keeping everyone on task, to me, that's a huge problem. 100%. Like, if there's not leadership within the team, that's when your expectations are not going to be held, because the coach doesn't see everything.
Well, and that's why it's so scary, right? It's scary to pull the new girl aside and say, "You missed the packet. Right. What are you doing?" Because you want to be liked. Everyone at the end of the day wants to be loved. It's really hard to hold a high standard, especially when it comes down to something that is so excusable as missing a sugar packet.
Which essentially is love for the brand, the team.
For sure.
So she actually is showing the highest form of love by not letting you get away with that.
100%. But you have to have the right people on the team. To your point, Steve, is that, and going back to your original question, is what does it mean to have expectations and how do you hold them? Well, a lot of times it doesn't get done because exactly what you just said. People are afraid of not being liked, and you have to have the right people on the team that aren't going to be offended by that, and you have to have the right people on the team that aren't afraid to be disliked sometimes.
Right.
and that's like definitely a trait that I've never struggled with. I should probably struggle with a little bit more, is that like, I don't care if you like me or not. I've had that trait since I was a high school athlete, and I would rip my teammates, but it's obviously because I wanted them to be better for the team, and I was going to hold them accountable, and obviously that gets you a reputation sometimes, and it sticks with me till today, where if you ask around, like, I may or may not have a favorable, reputation, I guess, but it's because I'm the one who is not afraid to hold people's expectations at any level ever. I probably should be a little bit more afraid, but it's like, to exactly what you just said, is you have to be okay with not being liked, but at the same time, hopefully you have the right people on your team. If you're in charge of that culture, hopefully you've brought the right people onto your team that can receive that criticism, in a way where it probably doesn't feel too good, but I didn't get mad at her. I was like, thank you, and I really meant it. Thank you.
And that's exactly why you got the offer at LSU, because they just knew.
Yeah.
They've been immersed in it for so long that they go, yep, that's correct, or nope, no shot here.
Well, I was also gonna say that about you receiving that criticism or that feedback. What do you think it takes for people to be able to actually receive feedback and actually understand it for what it is?
I just put something out on Twitter about this, is that because I recently had an interaction with an athlete where, he said, well, I feel like you're attacking me, type of thing. And I said, gosh, it's so unfortunate. I really believe that starts when you're young, with your upbringing, your parents, the coaches, the mentors that you have when you're young, because I can remember, like, this whole thing about, there's a really big uprising of, like, well, we can't embarrass the athlete in front of the team and really need to be aware of their feelings. And I'm like, well, that's nice until they get to a major league stadium and 40,000 people are booing them.
Yes.
Like, you think that's not going to be embarrassing? Like, how can you not? Of course, it's not okay for a coach to purposely degrade or embarrass somebody in front of a team. But if it's just, like, legitimately feedback or constructive criticism or whatever, based on a standard that's been clearly set, then if you feel like you're being attacked, that's simply your perception, and that's come from a long time of your parents didn't teach you, your early mentors didn't teach you. Mm-hmm. I mean, I got reamed all the time by my high school, both my club and high school coaches. And you know what happened? Well, first of all, later on in my high school years, especially when I was, competitive and wanted to get recruited, I didn't care. I wanted the feedback.
Sure.
But early on, if I went home and complained to my parents, they were like, good.
That's big time.
Yeah.
My parents didn't ever, oh my God, they would never side with me, never. I don't even think if they thought the coach was wrong, they would side with me, because they wanted me to understand that that's how it's going to work. And even if it was unfair criticism, you don't think you're going to get unfair criticism in your life? Better get used to it.
And we don't realize when we were kids how hard that was for our parents to do. Because the first thing they wanted to do was run to that coach's office, kick the door down, and say,
yes.
She's starting and hitting third.
Yeah.
What do we have to do here? And that's what they wanted to do.
Amazing.
Yeah, that's what they wanted to do, but they knew it wasn't the right thing to do. And that's the teaching process, and that's what fires me up about culture, and that's what's getting me fired up about what you're saying right now.
Exactly. Well, and so,
but you're exactly right. The easy thing to do as a parent or a coach or a teacher, the easy thing to do is to coddle people. That's so easy, because then the athlete goes, oh, I like you so much, thank you, and then you feel warm and fuzzy inside. That's easy. I wish sometimes that I had it in me to do that, because it would feel so nice.
Right.
Instead of every time, no, you're not going to get past me, I will hold you to this standard, period, end of story. And then it's not always a nice, warm and fuzzy conversation.
Well, so,
and that's why we have Mart.
Yeah, that's exactly. Yeah, they call me sheriff around the facility, so I guess I'm too tough on the kids. Well, no, I look at it, and so obviously that is what that mentality has simply, I mean, it's had to have catapulted you to a ton of these opportunities that you've had or having. And I don't want to get away from the simple concept of you leave LSU, you are a PhD, searching to be, you're an Exos, which if anyone understands that, that's a massive facility down there in Arizona, and then you're jumping into Major League Baseball, and you have to take a job at a restaurant, right? And I just think like in those, like that basic lesson of life is if you have the characteristics of quitting or not believing in yourself or not being able to take feedback or actually deal with the struggles of progress, there's no way someone would have taken that job or that opportunity, so I don't want to gloss over that simple, like this, you know what I mean? So when you kind of go through things, and you have, like you obviously have done a phenomenal job of tackling on struggle or embracing that thing and being able to immerse yourself into Major League Baseball environments and stand in your beliefs. And you're going to have to, like the movie Moneyball, I can't remember the scene, but I know the scene, but at the end of the movie, the guy says the first guy through the door is always the bloodiest, and I think about, obviously he's talking to, I can't think of the guy's name, Billy Bean,
Billy
right?
Bean, Brad Pitt.
Yeah, Brad Pitt. He's talking to Brad Pitt in the movie. But like, how have you been able to consistently, like when you're struggling or maybe you're starting to question yourself, what have you done that has allowed you to be like, no, I still, like, Rach, I still got this.
You're okay, Rach.
You got this, Rach. Like, what is
everybody likes you?
I know you talk about from early on, but like, where do you draw your strength from?
I don't even know how to answer that question. I would like to share. I'll come to that
in
a second here. A few things drive me in that, but so go back to the waitressing. I've shared this like a while ago, but I haven't shared it in a while on a podcast or anything. But so to dive a little deeper, I glazed over this again. Dive a little deeper into that
getting in there.
time.
Peel away.
So I told you that I had applied for like 8 or 9 internship positions in Phoenix, and again, I had a pretty damn good resume for like an internship position, and so I was like a little confused as to why I wasn't getting some responses. I mean, crickets, like nothing, not even like a thanks for your resume.
Right.
And so finally I get a response from one organization pretty late in the game. Someone had backed out and they called me in. I was super grateful, interviewed twice with the guy, and he was like, yeah, I think you're our person. I'm just going to do the paperwork and try to get it through and get you on. So I didn't hear from him for like 2 or 3 weeks. I do the follow-up, Finally, he calls me back, and he's like, I'm really sorry about this, but, he's like, I feel terrible. I just have to let you know it's not me, but I just want to let you know that our administration wouldn't let us hire a female. And I was like, dagger to the heart, and he was like, and I was like, oh, there's more. He goes, and, I've in this past 2 or 3 weeks, I've been trying to contact other organizations that I know have open positions, and I'm getting a lot of the same responses that, they got your resume because you applied for every single job, but, it's just not going to happen because of your gender. And I just was like, man.
That's shocking that you're able to even say that. Are you even able to say that out loud, or is that like
totally illegal?
Yeah, I was going to say.
But you know what? I'm still friends with that guy.
For sure you are.
Because that probably crushed him to have to say that.
Oh, I respected the hell of him. He was like, my mom is this amazing woman, and she has her PhD, and I respect women. And he was like, I'm personally apologizing to you, and I'm going to do everything I can to help you.
That's why he probably said that, right? Right.
Yeah, and so it wasn't him. He made it clear, and we're still friends. Like, we still chat sometimes. So anyway, so I had to go and get that job. Well, if you believe in God or Buddha or the universe or whatever, so the owner of the same organization that guy called me from was a regular at the restaurant that I worked at.
Nope.
We're talking about Phoenix has 5 million people in it. And that guy was a regular at the restaurant that I worked in. And so I was picking up his dirty dishes.
That guy had a lot of sugar packets left at his table.
But the moral, the end of that story and what drives me is like, all right, so this guy, the owner, he's a regular. He would bring in his daughter, he would bring in his wife, and he would also bring in his mistress to eat there. Mm-hmm. And I just thought, you know what, like, if that's, I don't care. I don't want to work just for an organization. In fact, my job or my mission in life has nothing to do with baseball. It has everything to do with developing organizational culture and using that platform to do something with a much higher purpose. And so, you asked me, like, what keeps me going or what drives me is like I want to empower women. I want to open up schools in the Dominican Republic for young women to get a better chance at having a good education, and also do that through athletics there as well, because the situation is they're so poor. I want to reform everything that's going on with the Dominican Republic and Major League Baseball. I want to improve education for those guys. I want to improve baseball, and in the process, I want to improve like the world. And that's like, it might sound cliche, but that's truthfully what keeps me going. And so right now, I literally have like a piece of notebook paper taped to my wall that says, "Be a general manager, change the world." And I just like, when something goes on, and trust me, at that restaurant, I talked a lot about Hillstone. This is great. But at that restaurant, there were times when, especially when spring training rolled around and I had already been told, like, basically I didn't get a job because of my gender, I would go in the bathroom and just, like, hold back tears.
Right.
I was like, fuck, like, spring training is going on. I'm going to sit this year out of baseball because of my gender. And, oh, by the way, I've got to serve the guy. I got to look that rejection literally in the face regularly. And that was tough. And I just kept thinking, like, no, there's something much bigger for me than this bullshit. And it's coming. And it's still coming. It's not even there yet.
Well, that notebook paper is going to be framed one day.
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
There's no doubt about it.
I just think it's just a crazy, I mean, silent. I don't have a question because I'm thinking through how that has to feel, right? Because you have something that you have just been told your rejection, and it is completely out of your control, right? Like that is completely out of your control, and so you controlled what you could control, and it's insane. The restaurant part is, I would have never thought we would have pressed play here and been talking about a restaurant, but it makes tremendous sense, right? And it's just like something that you couldn't control, you had to continuously weather, right? Which is in anyone who's in performance, right? In professional athletes or any in that regards, like so many times you don't have control over the opinion, the feedback, or the decisions of people, right? And so it's like, what do you have control over? Well, you have control over dominating what you're doing. Now, you just said it, like, I'm not even there yet, so you've just continuously made it a thing of your life of, I'm going to change the world, which you do have the ability to do without any title, right? Like, you can sit there and make yourself a better human over and over and over again. And then you are attracting what you need to attract, or you are bringing into the universe what you need to bring in and help others and aid the world, which is, that's a crazy story. I can't believe I didn't.
Well, it's so simple, right? So your perspective is so much better than everyone else's because you've seen that these choices are made everywhere. Right. You don't have this high pedestal mentality about it where I've worked in these cultures or I've worked at LSU or the Cardinals to say this is the best one I've seen is why you're going to be successful, because you're able to, look at it for what it is, not what people externally think it is. Well, and that's a game changer.
Well, it's also you and I have talked about your vision of being a GM, and it's like, it's crazy how those things are making you into the person that, like, it's making you be able to speak these things, right? Because as you continue to do that, if you want to do those sort of things, anything like goes back to the first person through the door is the bloodiest, right? Like you gotta understand those storms. Like you've got to be able to wear those storms and keep moving forward, which is super inspiring. Yeah. I mean,
is it fair? No. Does it matter? No.
No.
It doesn't matter. It just doesn't. It's so irrelevant, and that's another thing that Bonnie Balkovec, my mother, would always say, life's not fair. And it wasn't a malicious thing. It's just like, get over it. Like, well, figure it out. Yeah. It's not fair? Okay, well, I mean, life's not fair. She would always say that. God, she would laugh if she heard this podcast. She'd always say that. Like, it like haunts me in my dreams because it's so true, and it's come back to me. And it's like, it doesn't matter. Find a way.
I feel like you've got to be a Conor McGregor fan.
Oh, I totally am. I mean, I don't know anything about the UFC. I literally have, like, embarrassingly so. I don't know anything about fighting or anything, but yeah, I actually was thinking about him just today, of course.
Stevie nails it.
Yeah, because he talks a lot about envisioning things.
Yes, he does.
And And I have this recurring vision of like being at a press conference and when I first get a job as a general manager. I have like a vision in my head, and it's so strong. I can like see what I'm wearing, and like just it's crazy. And I was like, God, this is exactly what he always talks about. So yeah, I am a fan of his, even though I don't know anything about like what he actually does.
You have to do that when you get that GM interview. You have to, because he's got that famous interview where they're like, could you picture this winning the belt?
Yes.
He's like, yes.
Yes, I saw this.
Yeah, I did. I've been talking about it for years. You guys just didn't want to listen. You have to do that.
Right.
Because if I see that, now I'm going to have this huge emotional connection to
crying.
that moment. So selfishly, I'm going to need you to get that done.
But before I even knew who Conor McGregor was, I would envision myself like being in the dugout with players, like I would envision myself as a strength coach in baseball. And when people on interviews, just like this one or whatever, did you think that you would do it? I'm like, yeah, otherwise I wouldn't be here. I thought about it every day.
Well, it's going to be,
it just like pops into my head when it happened, and I was like, oh, that'd be cool. Like, no, I've obsessed over it for a very long time.
It's it's going to be interesting. We won't do it yet, but when we take all our guests, we always take them through our Diamond Series, which is third base is always vision. And essentially, keeping that carrot out in front of what you're visualizing, what you're seeing, because it does, the psychology piece of that is it starts wiring your behaviors to do those sort of things. We were talking to a group of kids last night, and we were telling them, a bunch of high school baseball players, and I was telling them, I go, your talent may never be Mike Trout or Clayton Kershaw, but it doesn't need to be. But the thing that all of us do have control over is we do have the control over having the behaviors of the best in the world. Like we can wake up and we can behave to what we think the highest level of behavior is. We can discipline ourselves to the highest level of our visions. We can see what that looks like, and you can start mirroring your life to think and act and do those sort of things where you can have that already, and you do that and you keep building the vision. It gets more exciting. And then obviously you wire yourself to accomplish those things, which is essentially what we're talking about right now, which is super cool. So for currently, because I know the neuroscience piece kind of triggers me, and I know I'm flipping gears here a little bit, but
Dang.
you do the, well, it's not flipping gears, but it is. I'm just curious. You go from LSU to St. Louis to Arizona to Houston, all over the place, the restaurant business, all those sort of things. And now you're overseas and you're doing biomechanics and neuroscience and those sort of things. So where you have strength and conditioning, you did nutrition. So where did this one come from?
When you say it like that, it makes me sound like such a floater, but in my head it all makes sense.
Right. That's why I know it. I'm sure it does. That's why we want to know.
All right. So, I've always, within the field of strength and conditioning, I think I've always kind of taken to biomechanics as it relates to injury, but also performance.
Right.
But I kind of same old story. Like I had some injuries and just pain, a lot of pain actually when I was playing in college and, or not playing in college, I should say. So when I was sitting in the bench in college. And, it kind of led me down the path of, like, movement and movement efficiency within, like, the swing pattern, pitching mechanics. So I've always had a pretty good passion for that, but also looking at the field and also looking at professional baseball and understanding where it's going is pretty important at this point because I thankfully entered baseball at the very beginning of what I would call, like, the tech bubble. I was introduced into baseball into that, thankfully. So I was never resistant to it. I always have had it around. I see it as valuable, but I also see it that a lot of times teams are hiring overseas for sports scientists and just other people. And you get to wondering why. And the answer is a lot of the education over here is based around like math and science and technology. Whereas a lot of the education in the States for strength and conditioning, that is based around based around keeping people alive, like cardiovascular disease and like general health fitness principles. So that was my educational background with exercise science. And so I saw a hole. I saw a a thing that I could improve in my arsenal. And then simultaneously wanting to cross over into the front office and just knowing that obviously it's about data analysis, a lot of it. So those two things are kind of married together in this program, where I have a passion for biomechanics and movement, but I also know that I really need to learn data analysis and just, math software and all that fun stuff. So the program really married those two things, and it's a year of classes and a year of research. So I get kind of a thorough understanding of both data collection and data analysis through this program, all the while kind of putting that together with movement. So that's why I'm here.
Do you think that like as you hear things consistently, right? Like obviously it seems like a massive jump to just like go from the strength and conditioning field to data analysis or math and sort of things. Like, do you think that everything kind of compiles to make it easier to, like, I guess what I'm trying to say is it shouldn't be so fearful to think that you can't jump into data analysis if you haven't been doing it, and you can be able to pick up the concepts quickly. Does that make sense?
Well, as you just asked that, I have my notes open under my phone to a thing called Heavy and Learning in my neuroscience notes. And it just really is amazing if you dive into just neuroanatomy and understanding the process of learning. And just, I know that you probably don't hold this belief, you guys don't, but a lot of people hold the belief like, well, I'm getting older, and you can't learn things as quickly when you get older. It's just bullshit.
Right.
It's just, but the thing is that those processes are not as readily available in our adult lives, right? Because when you're in school, you're constantly learning stuff, and that's a part of your day, is learning something new. But as soon as you get to be an adult, those processes you have to seek that process out. It's not going to come to you. So the idea of heavy and learning is that like we really need a lot of like repetitive input to learn something, which is, I think, intuitive, but most people just don't stick with it enough. So is it hard to learn something completely new? Yeah, it's hard. So hard. But I just am of the mindset of like, I know it's I'll call it physically possible, because it is a physical process. Learning, like the actual like neurons that connect change the way that they connect with each other. But it's like, I know it's possible. So I'm like, all right, it's possible. How the fuck am I going to get this done? Like, okay, I have to study harder than a lot of my classmates, because they're all fresh out of undergrad, and they're fresh out of undergrad in Europe. So this stuff has already been kind of, privy to them. Whereas I'm like totally out.
What an interesting thing to think about, honestly. Like, I think about like trying to go back to school.
Right.
Even like high school. Right. Even if I were to go back to high school right now, not only would I be probably overwhelmed just by the fact that I had to be in the same room for 7 hours, but I bet I would fail a bunch of tests. Because when you get out, like you get to actively choose what you're learning. Yeah. Right? Like I've actively chosen to learn about culture. You've actively chosen to learn about breath. Mm-hmm. You've actively chosen to learn about every single thing on planet Earth. Right? But it's a choice, right? And that's the coolest part about what you're saying is we go to class for 22 to 26 years, and then everyone thinks they're supposed to stop learning. That's crazy.
Oh gosh. And the reason why I ask that is because when you throw yourself into the immersion of just being curious, I've always seen it as like everything just connects. Like it's just a connection of all sorts of things that you learn, right? If you're just immersed into the environment of, I just say curiosity, just curious people, and as you're curious, like you can kind of go into something new, grab the principles of it and the foundation of it, and then you have to step outside and kind of start connecting what you've learned, right? Like learning is just interrupting what you've already forgotten. So it's kind of figuring out these things, connecting dots, and then having the ability, like you said, to know it's possible, right? Now all of a sudden I allow optimism to stay into my growth stage, and I can allow myself to comprehend the fact that, hey, like I may need to do a little bit of extra studying here because I'm not where these people are, but I also have this whole background that I learned in the last 5 years, whatever it is, right? It's just you have to have the ability to step outside yourself and go, okay, like where are my misses? What do I need to put more time into? And this is extremely possible. And then ultimately, that's where we talked earlier about vision, but ultimately that's what's exciting because you go, oh, when I get to this point in my life, I'll have all of this in my my toolbox, whatever, So
Yeah.
I've just always seen it like that. Like everything is just connected,
That's a cool way of thinking about it too.
Yeah, and I could be completely wrong.
And you might be, but we're going to learn about it.
Yeah, I don't know.
No, I mean, I don't think if anything, hopefully people take away from this podcast is like, I just talked about waitressing and how it deeply impacted me. So,
yeah.
So it is all connected if you allow it to be and if you see it like that.
And did you have anything on that, Stevie?
No, I love it. You guys keep going.
Well, I'm
learning.
And now this is my weirdness of my mind that bounces all over the place. But now one of the things that you just brought up, waitressing again, and I still think about this in humans. How was, going off what I just told you about optimism and whatnot, how did everyone, you had mentioned in the waitress story that everybody knew that they were at least going to move on. Remember that part of it, guys?
Yeah.
Steve? Yeah. So you're looking at me weird. I was like, did I remember that? Did I hear that differently? No. But so what I was thinking about in that moment and then right now where you're at, like you guys, everyone that you're at school with is now going to move on again, right? So it's like, how did everybody in the waitress and on that team, I'll just call it that specific team that you were on, how do people who know they're going to leave, they're not going to be a part of that culture forever, how did you guys all buy in so quickly and be able to sustain it if you know you're going to leave? Does that make sense? Like if you know I'm only going to be here for 2 years, you have such an easy reason to just be like, well, I don't really need to care that much because I'm gone in 2 years.
To not be invested.
Right.
Yeah. I would say for me, I view that as like, that's why it's so important for them to like have such a strict vetting process. And I think also from like because if you hire someone who's extremely driven, very smart, passionate, like they're not going to stay forever.
Right.
So, but the thing is that we're all just internally driven to be awesome. So I think
nobody shows up and just is like, screw it, I'm not going to be good at this. You wouldn't just show up somewhere and go, well, you know what, I don't really like this, so I'm going to be really bad at it. Right. No way.
Well, you hope not.
It's literally, I wish I could do that because I would be so much more relaxed. But like, I can't let it go. And like, I'm so driven to like contribute to whatever society I'm a part of in that moment. And it's even right now, like I'm in school, but I'm also helping out very part-time with the national baseball and softball team here.
Nice.
And I know I have a time limit on my time here. I'm done with classes in the middle of July, and I'm done here. Mm-hmm. And I'm basically almost interning for them, but I'm already like so invested in the girls and the guys that I'm working with. And it's not like I just go there and I'm like, well, it doesn't really matter. I'm kind of part of their team, but I'm not. Like, no, if I step onto your turf and you're allowing me to be a part of this environment or culture, I take that seriously. And so even as a waitress, they found the right person through a lot of interviews, kind of weeding people out, personality tests. They found the right type of people that they knew, even if they didn't care about sugar packets, they just cared about being great.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what it is.
Right. So so let's play the imaginary game. How about that, Stevie? Let's play the word GMs.
I love Rachel's it because this whole time I've been thinking about how many sugar packets I'm going to leave around you. See if you pick them up. I'm serious, too. It's going to be hilarious first time I do it.
When she's GM, you're just going to test her.
Yep.
Never forget where you came from. So you're heading the culture because ultimately the personality, and you guys can disagree with this or whatever, we can see where it goes, but the personality, you're the GM of the Detroit Tigers, hometown team, right? And you are with the Tigers, and it's taking on your personality, right? You're the one that's going to start and end the meetings in terms of this is how the culture is going to be run. Here's the knowledge, the biomechanics, the data, the metrics, all those sort of things in the system. And how are you doing what do you think are the effective ways? Because you've mentioned a lot of like personality test or like deciding through people. Like, how do you decrease your misses in picking the right people for culture?
Well, if you're asking about like what type of interview process I would use or vetting process?
Yeah, I mean that, or like even if you hire somebody and it's not going right away. Like, how do you, just anything of how do you decrease your slumps?
Well, also to jump on his question, I would be curious to hear how you would do your specific hiring process. I really would like to know that.
Yeah, sure. We can go that route.
All right. So, okay. This is gonna be one of those things where hopefully, like, I don't know, in 10 years when I'm a general manager, I'm gonna like listen to this podcast and be like, God, that's not how I do it at all. But,
that's all right.
Well, the best thing could happen is you go through it now and then it gets refined for the next 10 years. So it's electric in a decade.
All right, so I have some pretty like strong feelings about this topic, just because I think that people are so important.
Sure.
But I would say that everyone gets an on-site interview, because I don't believe that you can have a phone conversation or even a Skype conversation and really get a feel for someone. If I was a general manager, I would invite them for a workout. See how they work out. Yep. And I would purposefully place people, or I would purposefully make sure that there are people who are below them in the vicinity, like, or I shouldn't say below them, but like below them on the hierarchy chart, I guess. So janitors, or if it was an executive, I would make sure that strength coaches or athletic trainers were around to see their interactions with people who they viewed to be below them on the hierarchy chart. And that's kind of like an old adage where you take someone to dinner and see how they treat the waitress or the waiter, which, by the way, is so true.
Right.
So I would just like see how they interact with people who they view to be below them in the hierarchy of the organization. And the interview process, even before that, I would ask, like, so there's a book called Grit, which I'm sure you're familiar with.
Angela Duckworth.
Are you?
Old Angela Duckworth.
Old Ducky.
Yeah, old Ducky. Yeah, Angela Duckworth. She wrote a book called Grit, and I think she does an excellent job of outlining some questions that you can use in interview processes. So, like, when I conduct an interview, I actually just dig into people's past, probably without them even understanding exactly what I'm doing. But I'll ask, like, what was, mom, dad, who brought you up? Like, what was your family life like? Did you have siblings? Because I know that Duckworth mentions, like, the factor of having siblings or being an only child. She talks about extracurricular activities, how long, how many they did when they were young, and like, because that tells you, if they stick with things. So in the book, she talks about, if you did only one extracurricular activity and it was, just baseball, let's say, I feel like that's a strike against you. Sorry if that's anything that you did.
Oh, no, yeah.
But also
Which we didn't.
Other things, like I habitually, I'll be like, yeah, what were your extracurricular activities? And they will list sports that they did. And I'm like, all right, well, yeah, anything weird, like playing the flute or chess team, like things that really are not popular and that you have to really go out of your way to choose. And then how long did you stick with those things? So things like that. Also, like, when was your first job? What was it? Type of thing. Where if somebody says like, oh, I didn't have a job until out of college, so I was 23 or something. For me, I don't really like. I probably wouldn't go towards that person. None of these are red flags or like you're cross off, but it's just painting a picture of somebody. If somebody's like, oh, well, when I was 10, I was helping my grandpa out on the farm. I'm like, oh, all right, you know how to work. Like you've worked before.
You ingrain that, right?
So just like I vet people as a human, not necessarily like I will spend 10% of the time on what's your knowledge, your skill set, because that can be taught so easily, but you cannot easily reform a mindset. You can reform a mindset, but it's not easy. Like, it's not just easy work where we can sit down and give you a PowerPoint presentation on the biomechanics of pitching,
Well, it's crazy. Oh, that is gold. Steve's been just writing like crazy. You got Steve just fired up. We call Steve, the nickname's the Bull. The Bull is just revved up right now. The guy is just rolling. Well, I think it's the reason why I think it's I love what you just said about the knowledge thing. We just talked about that, right? Like, I might not know anything about data analysis, or neither does Steve, but if the three of us sat down and had coffee once or twice a week for a couple of months, you could probably catch us up to pace. You could get us to where we need to do it. Or if we're in the organization or we're in whatever field, you could at least tell us where certain things apply and how to, acknowledge it and then use it in the scenario, right? So I love that knowledge piece. And then I had just posted this morning about I've been tinkering a lot with recently why I think the human mind is so interesting. The old proverb of the students, until the student's ready to learn, the teacher will appear. You know what I mean? Like, until you're ready to actually learn, then you'll see the teacher. And I always relate that to, as a coach, in front of young minds, like you have to be okay with talking to space, right? Like you have to be you're talking to space, because until somebody's ready to learn, you have to be there, keep continuously teaching, right? So that's like the human mind of, well, you got to get through that quicker at higher levels of performance, so you don't spend so much time waiting for people to decide when they're ready to learn, you know?
Yes.
So,
Yes.
But that's what's so mysterious about the human brain and human characteristical traits and sort of things. So it's, I just love that piece. You just have my mind spinning on that. I love it.
Is that Tao Te Ching, that quote that you just said?
Yeah, I posted that this morning.
Nice. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's that one's all for. That was just the old past couple of days of reflection as we talked to some of the young kids. We're implementing breath into young athletes, and and I told them all that until you're ready to learn it, I'll teach it, but you won't have it until you're ready to learn, type deal. So, well, I know in terms of for time, and we screwed up on the first part of this on the technical side, which the boys need to clean it up a little bit. But we want to run you through our diamond series. If you're ready to run around the bases. So how our diamond series works is we created this a few years ago. This is our staple to MindStrong and everyone that's in it. This is kind of our awareness points. How we stay curious, what our blueprint is, and something to sustain us. So it starts at home plate with purpose. You go on first base, your standards. Second base is systems, what habits, goal setting, those sort of things. What are your triggers? And then finally, third base is vision. We've kind of let this thing evolve, and we like asking people questions out of that, so you can kind of dive in to people's diamond series and then have something, hardcore, concrete that you can always go back to and reflect on. So when I'll take you at home plate, we always start with purpose, and in terms of Rachel's purpose, and you've touched on this a lot, right? So identity-wise, what's your identity? How do you identify with yourself? How do you identify away from achievement, or what internally makes you feel fulfilled? And then service. What's your service to the world, to people? And then our favorite is, what are you willing to struggle for? Those are some of the ways that we find purpose. You don't have to answer all those, but in sense of when you get going and you have hard times, you have the emotional time in the bathroom when you're being a waitress and you had this rejection staring you out in the face out at the dinner table. You obviously had something internally that built you to have a strong purpose. As you grow and keep going, what is the thing internally right now that's driving you to stick with everything?
I would say empowerment of other people.
Mm-hmm.
And that's always, since I've been very young. Like I said, even on my 12 and under teams, I can remember bringing the team together and, the pitcher's crying or something. And I'm like, you got this, as a 12-year-old, I can always remember just wanting to lift other people up. And I guess my mission, or I guess my purpose now is just to have a bigger platform. The bigger the platform, the better to be able to do that on a larger scale. I love what I'm doing now and how I'm able to do that in small ways as well. But that's always going to drive me. And I just think about when I'm having tough times, and sometimes I'm in the middle of a really tough time where things aren't going well, and then I'll get an email in my inbox, and it's like, I'm so-and-so from this university, and you really inspire me. And I'm like,
those are the best.
I got to keep going. This is I'm doing something. Someone out there is looking at me, and I'm an idea for them. And that's great. So I've got to keep doing this.
That's amazing. That's awesome. Freaking awesome stuff, Rachel. So you go down to, you take your purpose of empowerment, and obviously that's you're living that, right? And you feel that love, that service to other people. So to do that and fill yourself up is your standards, mentally, physically, spiritually. You have some high standards for yourself as you've traveled the world at this point, And so what do you kind of personally, not as a coach, personally, what are your standards? What are the things that you physically have to meet, mentally have to meet, or spiritually you have to meet to make sure that you're living and making the choices for your, optimizing your results?
That is a tough one. And I'll just say, from a physical standpoint, I guess to reform what you said is okay, it's weigh this much, or if I have this body fat percentage or whatever.
Yeah.
It's really not about that. For me, it's about just my standard for myself is that I'm never stagnant. And that's from a physical standpoint or a mental standpoint. So, I'm 31, and I I'm happy. I can say this, like, just being vulnerable or whatever, open, is I'm happy with how my body is because I eat extremely healthy and I train hard, and it's really not to show it off or to, have a certain weight or whatever. It's just like I'm taking really good care of my body at the age of 31 for longevity, for mental clarity, for energy, so that I have the energy to be crazy and travel over and do all this stuff. I'm really happy with how my body is, but there's another level. And from a physical standpoint, for example, like I've gotten really into gymnastics and what I will call movement, what they would call movement, like Ido Portal. I don't know if you guys are familiar with him, but I don't even know how to describe him. He's a movement specialist, and there's a studio here. It's one of 5 in the entire world that's based here in Amsterdam. So I'm going there and practicing movement, which is a mixture of basically martial arts and yoga, I would say.
Yeah.
So anyway, Chet, you can Google that. I'm not doing a very good job of describing it. But
no, you took my thunder there.
For myself is that I'm not stagnant, and so I'm continually growing, both from a physical standpoint and a mental standpoint, an emotional standpoint, in my relationships. Like, I'm very critical of myself, probably to a fault, to say, hey, am I allowing myself to be comfortable with this? Is this really how I want to be in my relationship with whoever? Is this really the person that I want to be? Is this really the shape that I want to be in physically? Is this really, am I learning what I want to be learning? Am I holding myself back from learning something? So it's not about a certain thing that I have. It's simply being in motion, I guess.
I was going to ask you about that because you wrote that you wanted to move like a 6-year-old. I think that's super cool. Yeah. Like you were on, I think, the even bars moving around, and that's when your nickname's the Bull, that just gives you anxiety. So more power to you.
Then you might want to dig into that a little bit more, buddy. Like it's like you got to look in the deepest, darkest corners that you're avoiding.
Ooh.
Yeah, I did 135-pound squats today. I was pretty juiced.
Man, I talk about intentional growth and unintentional growth. Sometimes you get forced into growth and you didn't even know it, and you look back and you're like, oh, that's amazing. I'm so glad I did that. Sometimes intentional growth is harder because you're like, oh, I know that's going to be so hard for me and so uncomfortable, and I don't want to have that conversation with that person, or I don't want to ask that girl out, or I'm the bull and I don't want to do yoga. Whatever it is, like, that's where you should go, right? Like, go into that corner that you're afraid of.
Start doing yoga, Bull.
God, I feel like you know me.
You got the Bull. This guy's turning into a little hermit shell right now.
Cowering up in the corner.
She's just getting you across the ocean too, man.
All right, that's going to be a thing for me. Is I'm going to send you a thing of me doing gymnastics. That's just going to be a personal thing that you're going to get from me.
I will anxiously await that.
I'm going to practice a little bit first. It's going to be a couple weeks.
Yeah, give him some time. You hide out on that one. Stay hidden for a bit on that, Stevie. So awesome. So you obviously not being stagnant, and you take that into your life. That's got to create some awesome goal setting and some habits that you have in front of you in terms of. We usually just take this in terms of morning or nightly routine type stuff where you fill yourself up, or you're working on those things. Or more importantly, one of my favorite questions to ask is, what are your triggers, in the sense of what stops you from staying stagnant, or when do you find yourself going down maybe a slump, and how do you recognize that to get out of it?
I'm gonna, like, if this was like a real game, I'd be thrown out at second base, because I'm gonna, like, I'll tell you, I don't know how. But I will tell you, like, in the past, again, being vulnerable and open, like, in the past 6 months or so, just, I think, with some massive change of, like, leaving a career and moving to Europe, and, this season in AA, I was studying, like, I was taking prerequisites to get into this program. I was taking physics and calculus and, like, just hard classes. I was under a lot of stress, like, just a lot of stress. And I just got into some really negative thought habits.
Yeah.
And I don't know, actually I do know, when I first moved to Amsterdam, I realized it. Like, it took, I think, getting out of an environment, getting a little less hectic schedule, maybe just some mental space, to look at myself and be like, damn, I'm really, like, in a negative thought process right now. And I recognized one, and then I recognized again, and then again, and I was, like, having, like, some jealousy pop up, and just some really negative thought processes. And I'll tell you like a couple of things that I did that I haven't necessarily nailed down. Like I tell you, I'll be thrown out of second base because I don't think I have this process nailed down quite yet. But
well, you're just in a pickle.
Yeah, exactly. So I would say like I'm spending a lot less time on social media, a lot less time like looking at what other people are doing and just assessing what's going on with me mentally. I read incessantly at the moment. I have like 5 books that are on my nightstand that I read before I go to bed that kind of leaves me with, if I have a lot of stress during the day, it leaves me with a thought. And I don't read them actually. They're all books that I've read before and that I just consider like my mindset Bibles, I guess you could say. And I just leave myself with like a really powerful thought before I go to sleep, even if I'm not feeling so powerful in the moment.
Love that.
I would say just the idea of giving yourself mental space, which I know that really well, and I do kind of have that process well, but I allowed myself to not have any mental space, or I would say like enjoyment or just escape, I guess, for a very long period of time that was not healthy for me personally. I was beyond my capacity, and I let myself be there for too long, and then I just got down on myself because I wasn't being successful in whatever I was doing, and just that just leads you down a bad road. So I was like, damn, I need to really take care of myself. And as crazy busy as I am, and as much as I've devoted to like my career and just putting my head down, like I can allow myself to breathe. And so
lovely.
When I want to breathe, I breathe. And that could mean a lot of different things. That could mean I just like zone out and watch a movie. Like I do not watch a lot of movies, but I've watched a lot more in the past few months because I'm just like, if I feel the mounting stress or the negative thoughts or whatever that is, I'm like, all right, it's time to take a break. I get out of my house, I do whatever. I do something that's not, necessarily grinding my gears. So anyway, I'm kind of in a pickle there, but I'm getting there.
Good for you. That's the hardest battle.
Yeah, 100%. I love you sharing that too, because I would say I would have to say all 3 of us on the podcast. I would imagine we're all in the same age. I would imagine I know Steve and I have tinkered with those conversations many times of trying to figure out and enhance that awareness to just understanding yourself. When is it time to take a break? Because when you do, you run into the world of wanting to serve or be empowered like that and have high standards for yourself, and then you fall into the achievement world, right? I mean, we've all spent tons of time around high achievers, and it can almost become your kryptonite if you keep chasing, if you just feel like you have to keep chasing and keeping up with this success externally, if that will. And that's how I've internalized your last piece is, if you don't take time to understand yourself or rest or unwind, then you succumb to the mercy of outside sources of achievement, which can be extremely overwhelming.
Yes. Time to reflect, like space.
Yes. 100%.
Just space.
Well, Stevie boy, your favorite base.
Well, now we go to third base, which is everyone's favorite base.
The bull he always came in huffing and puffing over to the third.
Hard into third base. It's what everyone looks forward to most, and I know you've touched on it a lot in this podcast, which I love because I love talking about what my vision is and where I want to go to. But let's reiterate it again. What are we working towards? Where are we going?
Where am I going? I am... my vision is to have the largest impact on the largest amount of people that I can in a positive way. And I plan to do that through, in the recent, soon, in the coming years. And when I say soon, I mean in the next decade, through the platform of professional baseball and being able to have a platform as an executive in that realm, and use that platform to really create a system that allows me to empower a very large group of people. And I don't know exactly what that's going to look like at the moment, but I do envision it being wrapped into education opportunities for young women, and some sort of being able to give back through the organization that I'm working with. So
I love it.
We'll see.
And then just say it one more time. You're going to be the what?
I'm going to be a general manager.
There you go. That felt good. Felt right.
Wow. I mean, I've enjoyed our conversations over the last couple of months here, and I know we'll stay in touch and keep helping each other out. I have to say that was a really fun podcast to listen to you speak on a lot of that stuff. That's I admire it. I think that was an awesome little sit down. I know it's awesome. It's funny how your brain gets triggered, because I was actually really upset in the beginning of the podcast with the fact that we couldn't figure out how to get the buzz out of the way. So I was getting really mad. But just a few minutes into it, we just rattled off an amazing conversation. So from my end, Rachel, I just want to say, I always like to say to people, I think the greatest form of leadership is your time. And for you to set aside time, what time is it over there where you're at?
It is 8:30.
Yeah, so you've had a full, you're getting ready to unwind. You've had a full day. We're middle of the day here. We're going to take off here and get to work. And it's just like, what a cool story you have. But more importantly, like the way you articulate it is just awesome. And to the simple but strong, concrete lessons that you shared are just, I hope that we can turn this around and share this with a lot of people. I hope a lot of people listen to this and they take those lessons of life to wherever they're at. It doesn't have to be professional sports or changing the world. Just think about it for where you're at. Those lessons in that grittiness that you touched on. So, awesome story. I'm very grateful that Stevie and I were able to sit down and listen to it. But from my end, I just want to say thank you very much. And I know Stevie will share some words too at the end here, but from me and the rest of the crew, that was awesome.
Yeah, my big feedback for you is I'm going to listen back to this, especially on the interview process and what you want to do with that. And two, where will I be sending the gymnastics video?
Oh, wow. Well, you can send it to, you can always email it to me, but I think you should post it on Instagram and tag me in it is how I think it should be done.
Well, I'm completely off social media.
Till February. Yeah.
Oh, good.
Yep.
Oh, that's so awesome. Why? I love it.
I'll tell you, it's I honestly think it's changing my life, so it's been great.
Good for you. Oh, you might have just inspired me. Like I was about to take that leap, but yeah.
Do it.
It's good.
I'm telling you, do it. Just do it.
Well, you'll have to email me those videos of you doing the backflips and stuff.
That's a deal.
Okay.
I'm in. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you guys, I have a huge smile on my face, and I really appreciated this conversation, and I love what you're doing, so I'm honored to be on it.
Well, thank you. I'll let you know when we let it air to the world, but we will keep in touch. Enjoy your books tonight and get a powerful thought in before you go to sleep, and we'll have to do this again because this was a lot of fun.
Yeah, Tao Te Ching is one of the books on my nightstand.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
So, all right, Rachel. Yeah. Well, thank you very much for the time. We'll be in touch soon, and let's enjoy the rest of our days, guys.
Okay, thanks, guys. Have a good day.
Cheers.
Yeah. Cheers.
Bye.